Happy Halloween, everybody, and welcome into Tunnel Vision, a show presented to you by USCFootball.com. I'm your host, Jack Smith, joined in studio by Ryan Abraham and Connor Morrissette, and we are ready to celebrate the holiday as well as preview USC's matchup on the road at Washington this week. It's a battle of 4-4 teams, previous Pac-12 foes, but guys, the first time that they meet in the Big Ten. Kind of a spooky deal that USC and Washington are in this new conference in meeting for the first time.
For sure. Looking at this Washington squad, USC, there's a lot of similarities. They're pretty good at home. They're not as good on the road. They do have a really good pass defense. They're pretty crappy on special teams. We'll get into all that kind of stuff. But it's a big one. I think for both teams, the chances of making a bowl game if you lose this game go down significantly. Probably tougher on the Washington side. They have a tougher schedule left, and USC doesn't have to leave Los Angeles for the rest of their games. But this is an important one. You got to get, USC doesn't have a Big 10 road win yet, and we talked about this on the show on Sunday. Like, it might not count, but whatever. It's still, it's a Big 10 road win. They need to get something, and it's a really important one for both squads here.
Didn't want to start with talking about our costumes here, so people are unfamiliar with what I'm wearing for Halloween. I'm a surfer. I got the Malibu hat, the tank top, and you can't see it, but I am really wearing my swim trunks under here. So.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Nice.
Ready to just go jump in the water after the show's over.
I see Jay. Yeah, I'm trying to be like a Rambo kind of thing or something. We actually had a volleyball tournament on Saturday because USC had the Friday game. I got to play in it, and it was Hermosa. Everyone dresses up. It doesn't matter for anything, but we were all like Army guys, our Rambo guys or whatever. So yeah, that's what I just put that on. If
any of you guys watch the TV show The Bear, that's what I am. It's hard to see when I'm sitting in this chair. I'll give my best try to look at you guys into that camera, but I like doing Halloween, and I know Chris wanted to get on the show last weekend, and he got his costume in, and he's at home somewhere handing out candy, so he thought he would let his Halloween come early and then stick us here on the show to do the actual holiday episode so that he could be out eating all the candy.
That's so good. And I love The Bear. The Bear's a great show, so awesome stuff, Jack. That's a good one.
I see someone on Facebook calling me George Michael. That's funny.
I like that you had to Google who that is.
Yes.
So that's yeah.
Well, I mean, I know who he was. Like, I knew he was a singer, but I wanted to see the look. I mean, maybe
so. I don't know. Yeah.
That's funny.
As you
Happy
guys,
Halloween.
R.I.P. George Michael, yeah.
As you guys have looked into this matchup, and we move on from the holiday a little bit, what's the number one thing that stands out to you guys between USC and Washington this year? We've seen it so many times, but of course this is the first matchup as members of the new conference.
Yeah, USC is familiar with Jedd Fisch. Jedd Fisch familiar with USC. Probably the best win the Trojans had last year was against that Arizona squad that looked really good. It's funny, Arizona, they got to keep like Noah Fafita and T-Mac, and they're sort of cratering. And Jedd Fisch, complete rebuild in Washington, didn't get all of the Arizona guys to come with him that he would have liked to get, but there are some veteran guys that weren't big parts of that national championship team that are contributing that were already on the Washington roster. And plus they bring in a bunch of transfers and stuff too. So this is a team kind of like USC could have a better record than what they have right now. Like the USC has the road loss to Maryland, the most head scratching one on the schedule. Washington missed 3 field goals and lost at Rutgers. I mean, that's a head scratcher and stuff too. So there's some similarities there. And then, when USC played Minnesota earlier in the year, at the time, the Golden Gophers had the number 1 pass defense in the country. Some of that was scheduled. They're still a really good pass defense, and Minnesota's actually been good. Like, it's not as bad of a loss as I thought, earlier on. Washington now is the top-ranked pass defense in the country, and they've played a bunch of teams that kind of suck at passing the ball, and then they play Indiana, who had their backup quarterback, Curtis Rourke, was out. But we'll see. I think it's going to be a really good test because, one, you can see if Miller Moss has a good day. No one's completed more than 60% of their passes against Washington, so can Miller Moss do that? And then, two, people have had success running the football against Washington, and we've seen USC, when it was working, get away from it. So there's a lot of interesting factors in this one for me.
Yeah, tons of interesting stuff to get to. I look at Washington's offensive line, and Jedd Fisch said after the Indiana loss, I don't know if we have 5 guys healthy right now who are on scholarship, so their offensive line is in a really tough spot, and we all know USC's pass rush this season, it hasn't been great, but they did get 4 sacks last week against Rutgers. This is a Washington opponent where you can keep that going, and what you said earlier, Ryan, about how Washington makes a lot of mistakes, USC's made some mistakes too this season, but Washington is a team that you can pressure their quarterback and force them into some mistakes. They're really good between the 20s, but inside the red zone, they have really struggled this season. So it's a matchup for USC on the defensive side of the ball where even if they don't have everyone available, I think they can take advantage of some of Washington's weaknesses. We saw their quarterback, Will Rogers, throw 2 interceptions last week against Indiana. He's usually a little bit better than that, but Indiana, their defensive line, gave him some trouble because Washington's offensive line isn't as good. So on paper, I look at that. And then defensively, it's not like they have a great pass rush that can really bother Miller Moss consistently. They're 82nd in the nation in sacks per game with 1.75. So I don't want to say they're average, but they are right in the middle there of FBS towards the lower end of sacks. So USC, we've talked so much about this season, the trench play. What does it look like on the offensive line? What does it look like on the defensive line? I think in both areas there, for as many issues as USC's had, they should have an advantage on their offensive line going up against the Washington defensive line and vice versa. And that makes me feel good about this matchup, even though USC's had a tough time on the road this season.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like the Washington offense, which is where we can maybe start digging in a little bit deeper, is built on its skill position players and built kind of from the outside in as opposed to the inside out. I think you look at what the weaknesses are, and it's definitely the offensive line first. If you were looking for a second weakness, it's probably Will Rogers. I think he's really good, and he's had such an experienced college career. If he hadn't left the SEC, he would right now hold the all-time passing yards and touchdowns record for the entire conference. So he's experienced, but I don't know if he's that game-changer level. I think he's what people looked at maybe a guy like Will Howard as. Is he going to go and win you the big games? So the offensive line and the quarterback are where you have maybe some question marks, but the running backs with Jonah Coleman, who was an Arizona transfer, he's phenomenal, and the receivers are maybe the best group of 3 that USC will play this year. When you're looking at Denzel Boston, who he leads the Big Ten with 9 touchdowns, Giles Jackson is 4th in the conference in receptions, and Jeremiah Hunter is a guy who was practically an 1,000-yard receiver at Cal last year who played well against USC. So it's an offense that has the skill position players, and you wonder and you look at the parts, and it just doesn't really make sense to me how they're in the hundreds in scoring offense in the country, but they haven't been able to sum it all up. And part of that's the red zone, part of that's the offensive line. But it's a curious case for this Washington offense.
For sure. And, you mentioned Boston, like he was on the team, but you had all the other guys from, Roma Dunze and all those dudes. So you're playing behind them. To see a couple receivers that were sort of in the, background in like the 5th and 6th spots or whatever now emerging, that's been good for them. Jonah Coleman, if you watch that, and it's sort of like Woody Marks, and you're like, why is he not getting the ball more? And Jed Fish had said that he's been, banged up a little bit. He's on a pitch count. But I think last game he got 19 carries, which was the most he had on the season. So I think in this game you might see a Jonah Coleman get, 20-plus carries. And, when he's been really good when you watch him. And sometimes they're getting him the ball early in the game, and then he's not running the ball in the 4th quarter, and you're like, what is going on here? But it really was more of the pitch count thing going on there. So I think he's definitely someone that you have to watch out for. And this is if you're a team that moves the ball consistently, and Washington has, they're, I think, top 25 as far as total offense goes, or they're in that range, and hasn't been able to put the cherry on top of the sundae, hasn't been able to finish off those drives and score. Some of it is on the special team side. I think 7 missed field goals on the season. So those are points that you're not getting there. But you want to punch, a little bit more of those in too. So if you're USC and you're the USC defense and you get some guys coming back, you don't want to be the team that allows Washington to figure out their red zone issues and figures out a way to punch it in and score a bunch of points. They've been better at home for sure. So for the Trojans, you kind of have to keep status quo. You can't let Washington somehow figure out ways to score. Let them get the empty calories. Let them move the ball between the 20s. And then what happens when you get in there? We saw USC do a nice job of that, I think, against LSU, was the bend but don't break. You got to get back to that, because if you can bend but don't break against Washington, you're going to do okay.
Absolutely. And they have made some mistakes this season, and that's why their record is what it is, because it is so funny. In yards, they do such a good job with yards, but then I think they're top 35 in yards, but the points per game, they're up there in the hundreds just because of the missed field goals, like you said. So I don't exactly feel great about USC's defense in this game, because we've seen when they go up against opposing offenses and they let them hang around a little bit, those offenses have made USC pay. But Washington has pretty consistently gotten in its own way, with it being penalties and turnovers and special teams mistakes. So they have a lot of things going against them there. And I think USC did take a small step forward against Rutgers, and it's Rutgers. They're not very good. I understand that, but I do think, especially on the offensive side of the ball, there's been some progress, and I expect that to continue here against Washington. But, hey, against Maryland, we all remember USC, things were going great, and then Miller Moss throws the interception. Then the fourth quarter, everything goes to hell. So if the first half plays out the way I expect it to, with USC able to do some things and maybe they have a halftime lead, that's good, but it's all about can they finish the game. Against Rutgers, they did that. Now you're going up against a better opponent on the road who's going to be desperate because, to Ryan's point, they need to make a bowl game this year. They're probably, in order to make a bowl game, they probably need to beat USC. Can they do it again this week? I lean yes, but I understand if people are skeptical.
Yeah. This is a team, Jack, too, that they've won 18 straight games at home. You know, this is a good home field advantage. USC hasn't won a road game in over a year. They beat Cal 50-49 last October, late October, but over a calendar year since USC won a true game on the road. And so I think that's where, you know, there could be maybe USC's outplaying them, but the game is still close. So to me, one of the things to watch for is the special teams aspect of it, because all the different rankings, Washington is like one of the worst special teams units we've ever seen. Like, it's just a whole, like, not one thing, like everything they're bad at. And missing field goal. You have a good field goal kicker last year. He misses 3 in the Rutgers game. I think, like I said, 7 total on the season. We saw a little spark last week with, you know, Mekhi Lemon getting that big kickoff return. If it's a close game and one of those, like, man, USC is going to blow this on the road again, it could be a big special teams play that sort of moves things in the right direction. So that's going to be one area to watch. Washington's been really bad, and USC got a little spark with Lyman back there returning kicks. So maybe that's a factor in this game.
Yeah, the kicker's name is Grady Gross, and it's the same guy as last year, actually. They put him on scholarship. I think it was after the Oregon game last year where he hit some just phenomenal kicks, super clutch. This year he's 11 of 18. USC faced a bad Rutgers kicker last week, and that guy missed an extra point. So USC, it's kind of weird to say, but like has the special teams advantage on people now with the way that Eddie Chaplitzky's been punting this year. I think you'd like to see Michael Lance bounce back. I know he didn't really have a true field goal opportunity this past week, but he hit all of his extra points. And I do think that USC would have the edge on special teams, but you guys bring up the home field advantage. I don't think USC has won at Husky Stadium since 2016. That was the year they went in and beat the number 4 team with Jake Browning, and Adoree Jackson had a couple of picks. That was the Sam Darnold Rose Bowl year, but they last went there in 2019, didn't win that game. That was, I think, the game after Matt Fink went off against Utah, and it didn't work in a game against Washington. But not only has USC just struggled on the road, this is probably of the old Pac-12 schools one of the top 3 hardest places to go when you think about Oregon and Utah. Ryan, you've probably been to all of them. I don't know where it would stack up in your rankings.
Yeah, it's up there. It's a different construction. Man, this years ago. I think when Sark was coaching there, God, was that Pete Carroll?
It was 2013 was the last time that they, like that's when they renovated it. They reopened it after 2013.
Okay, yeah, because there was one they played at whatever, is it not Lumen Field? That's the baseball one, but with like where the Seahawks play.
I think that is Lumen Field.
Yeah, okay, and that's where actually right near where we're going to have our thing. We'll have to talk about that Friday night, our meetup up in Seattle at Sluggers. But yeah, when you go in there, it's like this. I know it's almost like Jaws when you're going up there, and we're way up there in the press box. And it just keeps like the noise in, and we don't get the best feeling of what it's like in the press box of like how loud it is, but it just rains down there. And you know, there's a lot going on in that game. That the fans really get into it. Now we'll see. You know, it's a 4-4 team. They've lost their last 2 games, but they play really well at home, and it's a good advantage. I think it's a different feel than like Autzen Stadium, just because like there's like this older, with like the metal and everything, it's like almost echoing, and it's different than Utah, like it's just a different vibe. But it's a really tough place to play. You know, historically USC's had trouble up there, so this is going to be a tough test. And Washington probably needs it more than USC as far as their schedule goes. Like if you want to make a bowl game, they have tougher games left than USC does. So this is one both teams are like. I think the motivation factor is high. USC would love to get a first road win. You know, Washington wants to, you don't want to lose to the former Pac-12 teams, right? You want to come into the new conference and like, I'm better than those guys. You know, you might have beat me, but They got a good win against Michigan. USC's got a pretty good win against Wisconsin, but now you're kind of like fighting your brother. So this is going to be a fun one.
It's funny, Matthew actually chimed in with a super chat right as I asked you, and he said, where does Husky Stadium rank among the loudest stadiums you've covered games at? So Matthew, thank you for the super chat. I hope that Ryan's answer was sufficient.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. That's great. It's definitely up there. I mean, it depends on the time. I think when Washington's like really good, this might be the best one. It's just the way everything is constructed and stuff. It's pretty darn good.
I think, too, USC being the opponent, that'll get people to come out because of the history, because of the Pac-12 ties. I read the Know Your Foe piece that our colleagues at the Washington 247 site gave to us, the answers, and they talked about how USC is an opponent that gets people excited in Washington.
Yeah.
And it means a lot to beat the Trojans when Washington's been able to do that. So I expect a good home crowd for Washington. And all season long, all we've wanted from USC is to just show us something on the road, and they haven't been able to do it. Like, I'm happy that they're going to be tested, that Washington, for the flaws that it has, they are a solid team. Jed Fish gave USC trouble last year. Like, it's certainly a game that will test USC, and that's what's fun about it. Rutgers last week, not exactly the greatest test. They passed it with flying colors. Now, new week, it gets a little tougher. Lincoln Riley's talked so much about developing. We're going to develop these guys. Like, let's see some of that development in action on Saturday.
And we forgot to remind you guys at the top of the show, but if you guys have any thoughts as the viewers, feel free to leave them in the comment section. We can put your comments on the screen as we have been doing through the show, and we'll answer some of your questions at the end. And if you do want to call in, whether it's about Halloween or about the game or anything, you can make sure to do so at 512-4-TUNNEL. But guys, it feels like one of those weeks where USC at the beginning of the season was a little bit privy to giving up the big play. If they give up the big play this week, it'll be really tough because I think Washington has the playmakers to take advantage. And big play doesn't always mean, a 70-yard game, but it could mean just a huge catch in the red zone like they did to Tyler Warren of Penn State. Do you feel like USC's in a good spot, though, defensively with the improvements that they've made over the past couple of weeks if they're not able to allow the big play and they make Washington march down the field and convert on third downs and in the red zone, which they've had trouble doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting 4 sacks last week, opponent adjusted or whatever, but USC wasn't getting to anybody as far as quarterbacks go. So you're getting some of the younger guys to play. I think people, as we've seen some of the Eric Gentrys and stuff sort of drop out and not be able to go, no more Anthony Lucas, Bear Alexander, guys like that. I think the younger guys are getting a little bit more, they're getting their feet under them a little bit. And then we saw a bunch of new players in the secondary with 4 starters out. So it seems like they're figuring some stuff out. It's going to be a whole different test going on the road, playing, like you mentioned, Jack, some really good skill position players that have the capability of breaking big plays. And I think when you're playing a team that struggles to score in the red zone, you don't want to do like what happened against Michigan and give up the 50-yard touchdown. If you give up the 20-yarder, like, hey, okay, now they got a shorter field to try to score against it. You have a shorter field to defend. You can get the stop. So I think eliminating the big plays is probably going to be a big part of this, because if you can just, you give up a first down, 1st and 10 at the 25, Washington struggled in those spots. So then you get a chance to reset and we gave up a bunch of first downs, everything. Washington's knocking on the door, but they haven't been able to break through, and don't let them do that. So I think that, and then trying to slow down Jonah Coleman is going to be a big part of it. But if you can slow down the big plays, I think that's going to be a really important aspect for USC's defense, because if you can get them into that zone where they got to get a first down and only 20 yards left. We've seen Washington struggle with that all season.
I definitely think Washington will be able to have some big plays. You look at the skill position guys; they're just better than the skill position guys, like the receivers for Michigan, of course, and they're better than what Minnesota has, in my opinion, and they're better than what Wisconsin has, even though Wisconsin's turned a little bit of a corner here. I even like the Washington receivers better than Penn State's receivers. Their tight end for Penn State killed USC, but their receivers really didn't do a whole lot. It's a group that certainly can give USC some trouble, but how can you get out of that? It's exposing that underwhelming offensive line for Washington. They just have not been very good this season. So some of those matchups I think certainly favors the Huskies with their skill position guys, but if USC can rush the passer and they can make it hard for Jonah Coleman, he pretty much always breaks that first tackle. It's really impressive. He did that against Indiana, but Indiana did such a good job of rallying to the ball that when Coleman did break one tackle, a lot of the times he would only have a short gain. He did break a couple of runs. But I just think Washington is limited on that line, and that will probably be the great equalizer in this game. Or if they had a great one, then I'd be a lot more nervous because those skill guys are really good.
Yeah.
It feels like USC hasn't gotten one of those shifty running backs, but they faced a ton of them that are just built like bowling balls, break a lot of tackles. When you think about Kalel Mullings or Kyle Monungai or now Jonah Coleman, it's like those guys' main skill that they just shed guys at the line of scrimmage. So I think one thing USC did really well last week, even though the first guy wouldn't always bring down Kyle Monungai, there was always one more following or two more following or three more that met him a couple yards down the field. And I think that's maybe easier at home where you're not as overwhelmed. But I've been impressed with the way that USC has stopped the run over the past couple of weeks. When you talk about a Penn State group that came to the Coliseum and didn't run to their normal standards, you gave up 200-something yards to a tight end, but they stopped the run very well in that game, and I think they did the same thing against Rutgers last week. So I think if you're looking at one thing that USC can hang its hat on the defensive side right now, it might be reverse from what we saw first 4 games of the season. I think they're right now better at stopping the run than they are the pass, and some of that is the beat-up secondary. But I do think that's a skill that USC has learned this year.
Yeah, I think even the opener, they did a good job of just swarming to the ball, and like it wasn't just if the first guy didn't get the ball carrier down, there were 2 people right behind him, and I thought then kind of get banged up a little bit, and you sort of got away from that. But like you said, Jack, I think they're getting more into that. You have to, you have to be able to swarm to the ball. And we saw, I think the last couple years, it's like someone breaks a tackle and there's like 10 yards of daylight, and it's going to be a big play. And so trying to eliminate some of that, there's a few that were happening, but I think USC's done a much better job. So we'll see. I mean, it's going to be a good test. The whole thing, I talked to Chris Fetters from Dogman, and I'm like, Washington's at home, they're great. On the road, they stink. Even in Seattle against Washington State, they lose that game. It wasn't, truly at home. And I'm like, is it that simple? And it's like, you kind of are who you are. That's really what it is. And is it the same thing, with USC? Like they played good enough to beat Penn State at home. They played one of their better games against Penn State. It was their best opponent, and they played probably the best game, ended up losing that one. But it's one of those situations where like, why is that? What's the big deal? And now this isn't a time zone change. I was even looking at our flights because like flying to Minnesota, I think it was like, oh, we're leaving at noon. Like, man, you land at 8 p.m. Like, what's going on here? Like, oh, today leaving at 11 and get there at like 2:30. Like, okay, this is much more reasonable because you're not traveling at multiple time zones. So maybe that helps. We'll see. But the whole home road thing, that's probably going to be a major factor here. It's hard to ignore when both these teams seem. If you're at home, good. If you're on the road, bad. So it's like, doesn't look good for USC because they're on the road in this one.
The sign of 2 inconsistent teams. And I just remember before the season, Lincoln Riley was asked about coaching on the road. And he's like, yeah, some of my favorite memories are on the road. And the players all talk about how they like the road more than home. Well, let's see it because it certainly hasn't looked that way so far.
Yeah. Speaking of the road, real quick, if you're going to Seattle or you're in Seattle, if you're a Husky fan, USC fan, whatever, but you want to come to our meetup, Friday night, 6 p.m., there won't be a World Series game. We were thinking there might be a World Series game. There is not. At Sluggers. It's in downtown Seattle, right near Lumen Field, which is where the Seahawks play. So, yeah, come check it out. We're just going to have like a group there. It's kind of a narrow bar, but we'll be able to mingle and chat with people and stuff. I've had a bunch of people RSVP already. But if you're going to be up there and you want to hang out with some USC people or just talk some college football Friday night, there's not even a Big Ten game on Friday night. So whatever's on, there'll be some college football and stuff on. No World Series. But we'd love to see you over there at Sluggers. Come and check it out.
I think that we've got a San Diego State football plays tomorrow.
Okay.
That's one Friday night game I saw.
Yeah, against Boise State.
Against
The
Boise
slate
State.
isn't as good. There's
Hey.
no Big Ten game.
You get to see Ashton Genty play on a Friday. That's pretty
That's
good.
not bad, yeah.
Close enough to Washington. Not super close, but close enough. We talk about Washington having, right now, in terms of yardage, the number 1 ranked pass defense in the country. Is that something that you fully buy into, even in a week like this against USC? Or do you think that the fact that USC is such a good passing offense, that they might be able to work around Washington maybe better than other teams that Washington has played? And I'm looking at Michigan.
It's similar to Minnesota when they came in with the great pass defense, and then we kind of made fun of them for their bad schedule, but they actually ended up having a pretty good one.
Yeah, it's not bad, yeah.
I think Washington's schedule, though, I mean, just look at it. Look at the teams they've played. Like Indiana, they traditionally throw the ball a lot, but it was the backup quarterback. Iowa, Caleb Jackson rushed for 1 million yards on them. Michigan, they don't throw the ball, period. Rutgers relies on Kyle Monangai. Northwestern, they have a dual-threat quarterback who I don't even know if he was playing at the time Washington played them. But, like, where's the great quarterback on this list? There isn't one. And Miller Moss, in my opinion, is the best quarterback that they'll have played so far this season. And Lincoln Riley, of course, is the best offensive coach that they'll have played so far this season. Outside, well, I mean, maybe Kurt Signe, we can argue about that. But anyway, like, their schedule's been so easy, and it's just been so run dominant. I think the number one ranking, like, is it a good pass defense? Sure, but it's nowhere near like a real number one pass defense. Who are their NFL draft picks in the back end? They don't have any like high end top level talent. They've been good. They've done well against a schedule that really has run more than passed. But this is a matchup that, on paper, you'd think might favor Washington because they have that number one ranked pass defense. But I mean, just look at the schedule. It's been all running teams.
Yeah, and Indiana got a lead, or like Chris Fetters pointed this out too, and they just ran the ball at the end of the game. So, like, Indiana is a team that if they can throw it all over the place, they didn't need to in that one. So even the one good pass offense that Washington played, starting quarterback wasn't in. They get a big lead anyway, and then they just run all over them. So I think this is one. What I like to see. I mean, you're looking at this. What's impressive? Like no one has thrown for more than 60% against this Washington defense. And I'm going to give you a little hint. One of my keys to victory will be Miller Moss complete 60% of his passes in this one. No one's done it, but they haven't played an offense like USC's, a passing offense like USC. So I think that's going to be, if USC has success in the passing game, certainly a good sign. But I think USC could run the ball here too. And if it's working, don't get away from it. I get it. Like a lot of times the run is set up because you have an effective passing game, but we've seen Washington just give up chunk yards in the run game, and I don't think you want to get away from that if you don't have to. Indiana likes throwing the ball. They ran the ball a lot in the second half of that game. If USC can get into a position where they have a lead and they can run the ball in the second half, I think they should do it. We'll see. Lincoln Riley seems to get away from that a little bit, but I think that'd be a formula for success in this game.
Yeah, Connor, I'm not sure if there are NFL draft picks on the back end for Washington, but I do feel like the corners and the safeties are probably the strength of the defense. One corner on the outside is Ephesians Prysock. He was a former USC commit, Arizona transfer with Jed Fish. Their best safety, Cameron Fabiculanen, is one of the guys that came back from last year's team. He wasn't a starter. He was their third safety that would play a lot of different roles. And they've got guys from last year's team like Elijah Jackson, Thaddeus Dixon that played a lot at corner. So I do feel like that's the area they're the most experienced and probably the best. But I agree that they're probably not first-round picks, second-round picks that are all playing super well on the outside. It's probably more a fixture of the scheme. But you do look at the coaching staff. Steve Belichick is the defensive coordinator. Brennan Carroll is the offensive coordinator. Like, these are guys that obviously have the family pedigree, but they know how to coach, and they coached with Jed Fish at Arizona. I think they're doing a pretty good job at Washington so far. So, I don't want to distrust a Belichick's ability to put a good defense together and stop the pass.
Yeah, Steve Belichick's background is in defensive back, so he has his hands all over that scheme. But, yeah, I mean, you're right. Those players are good, but, like, Fabiculanen, I don't think he's a fantastic player, and Prysock, he's a solid piece, and he could get to the NFL one day. But like, you think of that number one pass defense. Just look at like a Michigan last season where they have Will Johnson and some other great corners and safeties, and a lot of guys get drafted. Like, that's what I think of when I think of like number one in the whole land of college football. So they're number one, and we got to respect that. But I just think that schedule has been way more of the reason for them being number one than the ability.
Our friends over at Randall Troy pointed out they were talking about like the nepotism on this staff. Like Caleb, Caleb Wilson? He was a former. Did I get that right? He was a tight end at USC, transferred to UCLA. His dad was Chris Wilson, like the defensive coordinator for a while, and the defensive coach. He's on the staff. There's Armand Hawkins. There's a bunch of people that like you're familiar with, or someone's kid is like on the staff in some way up there. So it's kind of interesting what Jed Fish sort of put together.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I've never seen a coordinator duo that have the dads that are that famous. I mean, it's like Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick being on the same staff would have blown anyone's minds, and it's their sons are coordinators for the same team.
Like all the Super Bowl wins. It's funny.
I think another counterpoint to Connor too is one of the keys to a good pass defense and helping out your DBs is getting pass rush. That's something that Washington did a lot early in the year, but hasn't really been able to do in Big Ten play. And maybe that's because they've seen a lot of the run when you're looking at a team like Rutgers or Caleb Johnson at Iowa or Indiana last week. But I'm just not sure that Washington has the guys up front to help those guys on the back end. And if you're asked to cover these USC receivers for too long, like that seems like a recipe for disaster.
That's how I see it, too. I think that's a good matchup for USC with the offensive line improving and those receivers. It looks like Mekhi Lemon has established himself as that top guy, but if you focus too much on him, then someone else can burn you. So I don't think USC will have the same success like they did against Rutgers in that first half. It's not going to be perfect. It was almost perfect in that first half, but I do think they've taken a corner or turned a corner offensively, and they're going to be able to stress this Washington defense from a passing perspective the way Washington just hasn't seen this season.
If I put you guys on the spot and made you say, do you agree that, and do you believe in, I guess, that the progress that the USC offensive line has made, do you feel like they've really turned a corner, or do you think that it might unravel again going to a tough road environment, which they saw in Michigan for the worst game of the year and maybe the worst offensive line game USC's played in some of these stat tracking eras?
Kind of lean towards the latter. I think this could fall apart.
Oh, really? I think they've turned a corner.
That's good. No, I think everyone hopes that you're right, but I'm not. I feel like the level of competition has come down. But Penn State, I thought you did a nice job. But to me, that was more about the scheme than anything. Like they were just getting rid of the ball so quickly, and the fact that you saw the offense, move the ball some, but the yards per attempt were so low. It was pretty bad in that game, and I think it was because they were just like, all right, we're just going to get the ball out quickly. And it seemed like it took away from some of the stuff that makes the offense. So he was sort of like protecting the offensive line. So we'll see. I think this is now a road environment. Can you do it in this one? And can you protect Miller Moss? Can you avoid the negative running plays? Because we've seen, you hand the ball off once and he gets tackled for a 1-yard loss. It seems like the run gets abandoned for a long time. Like you can't have stuff like that happen. So we'll see. You hope they turn a corner, but I'm not convinced that they have.
I get your point, because against Maryland early on, that offensive line was terrible, and then when Miller Moss threw the interception, he was under pressure, and Alani Noah just didn't block the right guy, and Miller made an awful decision. I'm not trying to say he didn't, but that was a breakdown that led to a very critical mistake, and that was on the road against a defensive line that isn't fantastic. But I did think they tightened up after that mistake, and then against Rutgers, they were almost perfect, and now Washington, like who's the pass rusher on Washington that you're like, oh man, they gotta watch out for him. At least Minnesota, the guy who beat Mason Murphy off the edge is going to be an NFL draft pick, and the Penn State sack, that was Abdul Carter, I think. So when USC over the last month has made some mistakes, at least a couple of times, it's been NFL guys on who have made them make the mistake, and I just don't think Washington in their front has anyone like that. So could we see some mistakes? Sure, we did see him against Maryland, but I've seen an offensive line that has just been way better than the one that we saw against Michigan. And I think that was a coaching thing, too. Riley talked about it, how he felt like he didn't put the offensive line in good positions. So I'm expecting Miller Moss to have pretty consistent, clean pockets, and if he doesn't, then that's going to be a big problem.
Yeah, USC allowed some pressure last year to Washington, but it to Connor's point, was to NFL guys. They had Braylon Trice and then ZTF. It's a really long name, I kind of forget. But I feel like when Lincoln Riley puts his mind to it, and it's maybe in these big matchups where he feels like he has something to prove, or it's a matchup game where the rosters are similar, he does a good job in scheming open pockets for Miller Moss. And then also, like last week, it just felt so different. And I don't know if it was Rutgers being tired and on a Friday coming across the country. To me, it felt a little bit like that, but I just thought it came so easy for the USC offense last week that I don't know if that was the breakout performance they needed, but it sure looked like it could be.
Yeah, I think you're like, when you play a bad team, you want to just take care of business, and I think USC did a pretty good job of that, especially with the amount of dudes they had out in the secondary. Be able to like get after a common guy like they did, knock him out of the game and all that, but. It was still a Friday night, 11 p.m. local time for the Rutgers players and everything. By the time the game finishes, like 2 in the morning. I'm going to, take it with a grain of salt there and just say, all right, show me you figured things out. You're going to play better on the road. at a tough place to play against a decent team. This isn't, this is a better team than Maryland, of course. Probably similar to the Minnesotas. Minnesota might be better than we think, but they have athletes. They're year one with Jetfish. They're trying to put things together. We've seen them click at times, and we've seen them clunk at other times. Go up there and flex your muscles a little bit and actually show everyone, hey, we're going to do this on the road. We're going to beat a pretty good team, and that's going to set things up after the bye week to play Nebraska, to play UCLA, to play Notre Dame. And so this is a really important step. But if you clunk up there, if you just like fall on your face again, it's just to me, nothing has changed. I feel like you've tried to build on something, even though you had a 3-game losing streak, whatever you can take out of this Rutgers game. But it's more important to go out and get this big win on the road against Washington. If you do, I think people can start to buy in a little bit, but you got to do it.
I agree. And if they lose, are they going to make a bowl? Then we start to have to talk about that. And who would have thought that after they beat LSU? Oh my goodness, this team might not even make a bowl. They can quiet some of the haters out there who hate Lincoln Riley and don't like what's going on at the quarterback spot, and talk about Danton Lynn maybe not being as good as he was last year. We've seen all the hate from USC fans from across the board. Just you got to win games. That's what's going to make everyone happy. Danton Lynn this week said winning cures everything. When I asked him about recruiting, he just said, if we win, then that'll help recruiting. That'll help optics. It'll help with everything. You just need to win games. People will stop talking about closing practice if they win games. If they were Oregon and number one in the nation, we wouldn't be talking about the closed practices the way we have this week. If you just win these games, then everyone shuts up and will get in line, and they're 4-4, and so people are upset, which is understandable. Get to 8-4. Finish on a 5-game win streak. That's how you get people to buy back in. That's how you go into the offseason with some momentum. And if it's 7-5 again, you can't really point to tangible progress. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I think the optics of a 2-game win streak is far different than what people would say of, hey, they've lost 4 of 5. And then the Rutgers win almost gets erased. It just gets lobbed in there as it's they lost 4 of 5. Who did they beat? I don't really remember. The optics would just be huge. And I'm not saying a 2-game win streak is anything that you celebrate at USC, but the difference between saying 2-game losing streak versus losing 4 of 5, we're getting into last year territory if they lose this game where every week it was they've lost 5 of 6, and then they just continue to rack up those numbers, and it was not a positive sight around here last year. But we've previewed the game a little bit. I think it's time that we hear a little bit from the fan base.
Yes.
We have a couple of callers in the queue. If you guys want to call in, 512-4-TUNNEL, you guys can give us your thoughts. But we will go to our first caller, Mitch in New Jersey, calling in. Hi, Mitch. Happy Halloween. Welcome to Tunnel Vision.
How are we doing, guys? Happy Halloween to you guys also. We have a great set of wide receivers. Robinson, Deuce, Lemon, and he's for real. And Becker Branch, hoping to get more catches also. But, Colby, Jacoby Lane, Hudson, and Kyle Foy. They're pretty good threesome there, too. Kyle Ford came up with Drake London, I think, Boo McCoy, which I saw him to see at Tennessee. What do you think about these guys we should be pulling away from these games, not be 4-4? Got ourselves in a pickle here. But thanks for taking my call.
Of course. Thank you, Mitch, for calling in.
Yeah, so with the receivers, it was great to see Kyle Ford make a jump, and it was awesome to talk to him after the game. And I get what the caller was talking about, where on paper, this should be a dynamic receiving group that should be maybe the best in the Big Ten. Who's the best receiver group in the Big Ten on paper? Probably Ohio State, but
yeah, definitely Ohio State. Then Oregon.
Yeah, and Oregon, but USC, they could be right there on paper, and it just hasn't come together. So yeah. I get the frustration with wanting to see more of these guys, and you talk about Kyle Ford and Kyron Hudson, and Hudson's making the ridiculous catch against LSU, and Ford has a good game against Rutgers. It just hasn't all come together, and that's another part of finishing the season strong here. If these wide receivers and Lincoln Riley calls the right plays, if they can reach their potential and really take a step forward here, then USC becomes really hard to beat. And that was sort of the recipe for success that I thought they would have at the beginning of the season, if they did have a good year, it would be leaning on those receivers, and it just hasn't really happened. So maybe that's going to be a trend here moving forward. We saw Mekhi Levin take that step forward. Maybe some other guys will help as well. Kyle Ford continues to do what he's doing. That would be good. But, I certainly get the questions and the concerns with the receivers because they have been up and down just like the whole team.
I think the difference between a USC and an Ohio State is right now it's pretty clear who Ohio State's like top 3 receivers are, and they're consistently the best 3 every week. Feels like USC in a given week could have 7 different guys that you would put as the top 3 receivers, and maybe it's time that figures that out. I mean, the 4 sophomores are sophomores, and they haven't had a ton of time at the collegiate level yet, but then you look at a guy like Jeremiah Smith come in, and he's maybe the best receiver in the country as a true freshman, and USC, I'm sure, is hoping that one of those 4 young guys would have been that their freshman year, but it doesn't always work out like that. There was a reason Jeremiah Smith was the number 1 recruit in America.
Yeah, and I think Mekhi Levin that was a Mekhi Levin game last week. I think I got a feeling you're going to lean on him a little bit more.
I mean, hey, he's led the team in
3 straight
yards
weeks.
for 3 straight weeks. No one had done that.
Set his career high in 3 straight weeks.
So he's clearly, like, Jacoby Lane had that great game against Wisconsin and then hasn't really been able to get back there. It's nice to see Mekhi Levin make that steady progress.
We have got another caller in the queue. It's Dave from Iowa. Doesn't say what he wants to talk about, so it's a trick or treat with Dave today. Hi, Dave. Thanks for joining Tunnel Vision.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Loud and clear.
All right. I've got 2 questions, as always. First, it's crazy that the buyout is north of $90 million, according to what Pete Thamel has said. Doing the math, that's basically $13 million a year. Is Riley really worth that? Since the record is mediocre, since the record is mediocre, plus he's paranoid with the media making observations. And second, minor Billy Bean is coming out from Moneyball when it comes to firing people. Would you rather take a bullet to the head or 5 to the chest and bleed out? I'd rather take the bullet and move on from Lincoln Riley.
Dave, bringing the heat, as always.
Yeah, wow.
I can let you answer the contract and buyout question.
The bullet to the head, though, was like $90 million. Like, you ain't doing that. Like, and so we'd put in the war room that it was a very significant number. We had heard very similar number than what Pete Thamel reported, so I think that's matches what we were told, the information that we were given. So bigger than Jimbo Fisher's buyout, which was the biggest thing we've ever seen as far as buyouts go.
Significantly bigger. Jimbo's was 65.
Yeah, and I don't think my guess is, and I don't know the details of the contract, but it's still probably like the $11 million a year thing, and there might be stuff in it like loan for his house or the buyout for Oklahoma. There's probably some other factors into it, but yes, it's a significant amount of money. If you were going to try to hire somebody at that level, that's the going rate of what coaches were making. I'm sure like Jen Cohen would rather not have a 10-year deal that you're locked into. That she has basically no leverage, right? Like, because there's no way you're going to raise the money to fire a guy like that, especially in this NIL world where you're going to have to pay $22 million out of the athletic department every year for your players, and you could put that money towards players basically. So you don't need to we're going to forego building a bigger fountain in the players lounge. Like, this actually can go and get more dudes to get your team better. So you can help make your coach better. I think the Jimbo Fisher thing, people just got so tired of it, and they pooled the money and got it. Now, a year or two from now, if USC's going like 6-6 and 7-5 every year, it's probably a different story. But not in the middle of year 3 are you trying to put together nearly 9-figure buyout. Like, I just don't think that's happening. Was he worth it? Like, you're worth what people will pay you, and he got paid the going rate. All you got to do now is you've already agreed to a contract. You're paying the guy a lot of money. It's not your money. It's not my money. I don't know. What do you care about it? But the school had made that investment in Lincoln Riley, and now it's up to him to deliver. And I think the school also is trying to support him however they can. Money through the House of Victory, through NIL collective stuff, trying to get the best roster possible. All of that. So it's all a factor. But yes, that just seeing that number makes it like you're not taking a bullet to the head, 5 to the chest, anywhere you want. Like, you ain't doing any of that. So that ain't working.
Yeah, he's not going anywhere. But I mean, USA Today released their highest paid coaches in the country list 2 weeks ago, and Riley's number 4. and it's now year 3, and they haven't sniffed the college football playoff the last 2 years. They did that first year. Like, you got to get results.
No, yeah, like for being the number 4 paid coach, like you want to have results that are similar, and his results have not been similar.
Yeah, so that, I mean, I get the point of the call, but they're just kind of stuck. So
Yeah. I think the recruiting results are coming around a little bit, at least now that they've got the NIL up into what we have talked about in past weeks is a good place. The question I'd ask to USC fans, and maybe straight to you, Dave, if USC was able to raise $90 million, do you think USC is better off using that $90 million to buy out Lincoln Riley and then starting a brand new coaching search and then going back to ask those same people for more money for NIL? Or are they better with Lincoln Riley as the head coach and using the $90 million to pay people to join the football team and to make the improvements? Even if you could raise that $90 million, I think you'd rather have Lincoln Riley spend it than someone else come in and not be able to spend any money because all the money was just used to buy out the previous coach. So it's a tough situation, and buyouts are hard. I know you look at what Texas A&M is right now, but that was $65 million. I think it is a more loyal monetary fan base at Texas A&M right now, and there's more of that oil money coming in. But it is hard too to look at what Mike Elko has done in just year 1. But we said the same thing when Clay Helton was fired and Lincoln Riley was brought in, and he had immediate success. So it's hard to sustain success in college football. Not trying to apologize for Lincoln Riley's struggles or anything like that, but I still don't believe they're better off without him and $90 million in a hole.
Yeah, no, unquestionably because of the hole. But like, they could get rid of him. We could actually have that conversation because like 4-4 in year 3, man, that's so bad. That is so bad.
It's like, I think it's more just looking at it from a realistic point of view. You want him fired, that's great. You can't. Like, it's not happening.
Yeah.
So you're going to make the best of the situation. USC has some success, and he leaves for like an NFL job. Like, that's, if you're trying to get Lincoln Riley out, that's probably the best. If that's all you're focused on is Lincoln Riley not being there, it's most likely going to be, for the next couple of years at least, they have success and he leaves, as opposed to you can do something to get rid of him. It just does, it's just not, that's just not in the card. So you got to do whatever you can to support him. And he's still a young head coach, and I think he makes some bad moves, and I think he can be really stubborn and stuff sometimes, and says things he probably shouldn't say. But I think if you can learn from that stuff and build on it, then he can have. He's obviously had a lot of success already. Just the number of the Heismans and making the playoffs and winning conference championships. It was a different situation there, and the game is different. And I think USC and Lincoln Riley have been slower to adapt to this new age of college football. USC traditionally has been slow to adopt to those kind of things, and I think Lincoln Riley has shown that he was as well. It wasn't just USC. I think he was kind of slow, and not just jumping on and here's how we're going to do things. And they're still figuring that stuff out. But he's a young head coach. I think there's still a lot of opportunities there. Just realize, like, he's your partner for at least a couple of years, so figure it out.
You just got to hope he figures it out, which is what we've said all along. And this offseason will be a big tell, because if they go out and they're more aggressive with recruiting, we could say, okay, looks like they learned a lesson. If not, then they're banking on what they banked on this year, and we'll go into the season more skeptical, so we'll see.
Yeah, still not sure whether I'd agree with it, but I think there would be a lot more hot seat talk if the buyout wasn't $90 million.
Oh, yeah.
I think he gets to dodge some of that conversation in those clickbait ESPN articles that say the top 10 coaches most likely to be fired. He would be on more of those lists. He would hear it probably a little bit more if the buyout wasn't that high. And
100%.
even if it was, $10 million, USC would, like, what'd Clay Helton get? A little over 10 when he was bought out at the end?
I'm not sure, but
it was enough where he was fine going to take a Georgia Southern job. I know that, but it wasn't $90 million. That's for sure.
Yes,
I would still, if his buyout was zero, give him next season. I think that's
100%.
too. When
Yeah.
they have a good recruiting class coming in, and next season, that's when the 2023 guys are in their third year, and that's like, it's his team now, of course, in year 3, but it's really his team. Like, Jonah Monheim is gone, the Clay Helton holdovers, there'll be a few, but it's really going to be Lincoln Riley's team, like, fully next season, and then, pass fail.
Yeah, I think you give, it's tough to fire a coach before their first recruiting class even matures to be an upperclassman. That seems like it would be a little bit too fast. And I know that some of those guys that USC brought in, like a Damani Jackson or a Raleek Brown, that first class that he was in didn't fully pan out at USC. But now that you've got that class in, not one he had to hurry to finish up right when he got there, but the Zachariah Branches and the Braylon Shelbys and that group, once they get to their junior, senior year, I think you can start to fully judge the regime that Lincoln Riley's had. Thank you guys so much for the calls, Dave and
thanks.
Mitch. We can get to questions now. Randy asks on YouTube, regardless of how this season plays out, do you see USC riding with Miller Moss next season?
Impossible to say right now, because is Jaden Mayava going to be there? Is Julian Lewis going to be there? We don't know for sure on either of those guys. Assuming all three will be, I'll say it's an open competition, and I think Moss would have a hard time retaining the job in that competition. But if those guys aren't around, then maybe. We just have no idea. It's so tough to predict that with the transfer portal and with recruiting the way it is. You just have no idea who's going to be on the roster right now with about 6 weeks or less than 6 weeks, like 4 or 5 weeks before signing day.
Yeah, it changes. The roster is going to change a lot, but it also is going to depend how USC finishes. If they struggle, if it's like a 6-6 team, the incumbent quarterback is not, guaranteed anything. If they actually, go 8-4, maybe win a bowl game, go 9-4, then I think there's a better chance that's like, hey, Miller Moss is still leading this team. So, Lincoln Riley made the decision not to bring in a veteran quarterback last year. He might change his mind this year, depending on how this, it could depend on how the season plays out.
Yeah, you're definitely not saying no if he says, I want to come back. Like, I don't want to go to the draft. I want to come back for another year of college football. You don't say no, but I don't think that automatically means he's the starter for next season. A Dog's Life in Portland says, if there are heavy showers, does that change your outlook on the game? I think we're supposed to avoid the rain, which is good, but I'll still ask the question.
I don't think so. Like, USC's had 3 road games. The biggest issue was the multiple time zones. The weather's been awesome in all 3 of them. I mean, we've mentioned this a bunch of times. Minnesota's warmest October kickoff ever. You did not get inclement weather anywhere. So, yeah, it's more been just the travel than anything. So I guess bad weather would make it even a little worse. But I'm not saying, if it's good weather, it won't be a problem. No, they've had good weather everywhere they've gone and still struggled.
40% chance of rain I'm seeing here, which is different because earlier in the week it didn't look like
it didn't
anything.
look like, yeah.
I mean, I don't think it helps USC, but if Lincoln Riley chooses to run the ball more than it could, it all kind of comes down to what they do on offense, because we know they have a really good tandem of running backs with Woody Marks and Quentin Joyner, and Washington has their great running back in Jonah Coleman, but after him there's a pretty big drop-off. For USC, say it is pouring, you can throw a couple of guys at Washington's defense and probably be in a better position than Washington is. So it should help, but is Riley going to keep passing the ball the way he's been passing the ball? That's the question.
Yeah, in the USC game notes, the information office says USC's 24, 23, and 1 all-time in rain games. So, I guess the statistics say that you probably does change your outlook. It's not a lot of games, but they're practically 500 in the rain. So I don't know. I don't know how much stock you put into that, but I agree. I think USC is if it had to be, you could not pass the ball once, I feel like USC is probably in a better spot there based off their ability to run the ball. Mr. P on YouTube says, when USC has won the toss, Lincoln Riley has elected to take the ball first. With the makeup of this team, do you think it's better for this squad to defer and play defense first?
I'd rather defer. That's just my preference, but Riley always takes the ball, so I don't know.
I think they prefer to play with a lead, which who doesn't, but this team hasn't been great at coming back at the end of these games. So I don't have a huge issue with it. They have scored, I think, 2 touchdowns on their opening drives this season, so it hasn't always worked, but I kind of lean towards liking it because Lincoln Riley's an offensive coach. We're going to do what we do best. I know that it hasn't been great this season, but I kind of like what it tells the opposition. Hey, this is what we do. We're going to do it, and good luck stopping it. So mentality-wise, I like it. But I mean, is it as practical as it could be? It's probably better to try to do the score at the end of the half and get the ball to start the second half. But I don't have a huge problem with it.
Yeah, Rutgers. I mean, I think USC scored the first 4 drives against Rutgers, touchdowns.
Yeah.
So if that happens, then sure, that's good. But just the way the things have gone in the second half, I think deferring, just fight your way through the first half and know, hey, get the ball to start the second half. Let's make it work. So, but,
Yeah, if you take the ball, you have to either score a touchdown on your first drive or you have to get the ball back and score going into halftime. And USC has not been great on opening drives, and they have had the ball, I feel like, a lot on 2-minute drill drives at the end of the half, and they have not punched it in for touchdowns very often. If I were a head coach, I think I'd take the ball at home and defer on the road. I don't think you really want your offense going out there first on the road because that just can get the crowd more riled up than seeing their offense on the field. Jay on Facebook says, is USC getting any of its defensive backs back for this game?
We don't know. Lincoln Riley didn't really paint a clear picture. He was asked on Tuesday, and he said pretty much maybe. So not sure. I do think they'll get some of them back, but I don't think they'll get everyone back.
Bob, so Lincoln Riley did say, we feel like because so many guys were out, we're destined to get some of them back, but no one's long term, but he didn't really give which names that was. But Bob on Facebook says, what do you guys think the spread will be for the run and the pass for this game?
Like
the split, I guess.
It depends if they're losing or not. If it's a close game, which I think it'll be pretty close, I think I have USC winning by 7 in the end. I'll say maybe 65-35. I don't know what's been correct from that point of view this year. I know against Maryland they ran it 20 times with their running backs and threw it 50, so that was a little bit out of whack. Maybe 60-40 then. 65-35 sounds kind of high, but yeah, 60-40 maybe.
Yeah, when USC is not moving it well offensively, it feels like they try and pass to get out of it. Last week, when they were playing very well, it was a pretty even split. So I think if it all just kind of depends on the way the game starts, and maybe you can try and infuse the run later on if it's not working, but the staff hasn't really shown the willingness to go out and do that. But that'll wrap it up for questions. Thank you guys so much for tuning in the chat. Ryan, what's the spread we're going with for this one? Is it 2.5?
USC favored by 2.5 on the road.
I was a little surprised just because it's at Husky Stadium that USC was favored in this game. But do you guys have a lean right now as we prepare to pick this game?
I mean, I could see what Connor's saying, that USC goes up there, they figure some stuff out, and they win the game by 7, and it's pretty comfortable, 10 points maybe even. But it's hard for me. USC's been a road favorite 3 times this year, and not only didn't cover the spread, but lost all of them.
Yeah.
So, and I think Shotgun pointed out, or maybe it was Action Network. Might have been Brett McMurphy. I think the last six or 8 or something road games for USC haven't covered it as a road favorite. Haven't covered any of them and lost outright a bunch of them. 3 of them from this year, And Washington has an 18-game home winning streak. So I think I'm just going to stick with that, getting points. And, I like what I see from USC more than I've seen from Washington, but I've also seen USC. I mean, that Maryland game, there was no excuse for that. They got blown out at home by Northwestern, right? That's a bad team. That's a horrible loss. It's getting worse and worse. And so I'm not going to put a lot of confidence in USC on the road until they show me they can do something. I think I've picked USC to cover most of these road damn spreads, and you get them all wrong. So I'm going to get some points for a team that hasn't lost at home for a couple years. I'm going to take the Huskies in 2.5.
And that pick means a lot, Ryan. You're the leader, I think, in the.
I'm not. Shotgun's the leader now because I got it wrong last week. I took Rutgers, so. You and I might be tied, Jack. We're both 4
I forgot
4.
whether I was behind you or Shotgun. I thought it was you.
Yeah,
so.
You and I think we're 4-4. We're in second, but Shotgun's 5-3. So he took USC last week.
I am in last, but I was the leader last year. I was tied for first last year.
Your preseason record prediction though might be the closest to being correct.
Yes,
so.
That's true. But if you can't pick the freaking games individually, what's it worth?
Yeah.
But I just like USC. I think Vegas they know something this week. The money. With USC, the spread it went up to 2.5, and it's plus 100 if you bet on Washington right now. It's minus 120 with USC. They really have a good feeling about USC, and that makes me have a good feeling about USC. I do think they've turned a small corner, a lowercase c corner, after that Rutgers game, and Washington makes a lot of mistakes. I think USC should be able to outscore them, and I like them by 7. So probably fade that because I'm 2-6 on the year with the pick'em. So that's my analysis. Feel free to go with Washington after that because I have not been very good this year.
Connor's scaring me out of my pick, but I'm also going to go with USC.
Ooh.
Strictly, football is a points game, and I'm not sure how much I trust Washington, even if it moves the football to score points against USC. The red zone offense has not been good this year for Washington, scoring in the hundreds in terms of total scoring offense in the country. There's only 131 teams, so you don't want to be in that kind of company. USC, I think, recently, as well as for the most part this season, has been good on third down and good in the red zone defensively. It's 50% of the time they give up a touchdown in the red zone. That's a lot better than what we've seen in past years from USC. So I'm not saying they're going to go out and shut down Denzel Boston or Jonah Coleman or these great playmakers on the outside or in the running back room, but I'm just not sure if I trust Washington to score enough points in this game to win it outright. And maybe USC even wins by 1 and Washington covers. But I don't know. I like USC to win this game, and the spread is so low that I feel like I have to take USC minus 2.5.
I think the red zone aspect of this is very important because Washington has been bad. The thing that USC's been really good on third downs, but they've been really bad on fourth downs. I think 58% or something like that, at least that it was last week. So those are opportunities for Washington to potentially pick up a couple of fourth down conversions, and then you score, as opposed to like maybe they don't kick that 40-yard field goal. They go for it on 4th and 2, and then they end up with a touchdown. I think that's the aspect where USC needs to get better. I wanted them to get better against Rutgers. Rutgers is bad. They still converted 3 fourth downs in that game, so that's concerning. Like, you got Joda Coleman, you got those wide receivers, a very experienced quarterback. Like, you can pick up some fourth downs against USC. So that's where the red zone thing might get derailed a little bit if Washington just goes for some fourth downs that they don't normally go for and they pick them up.
It's a huge week for the USC coaches, too, because if you lose to a Washington team that's in year 1 of a rebuild when USC's in year 3, like, this is a game that they just need to win.
You have to win.
At 4-4, even more so. Like, you're playing for the heart of the fan base right now. Like, people are so out on this team. Like, you need all the help you can get. So I think that desperation, felt like they were a little desperate before Maryland, and that didn't help. Hopefully they learned some lessons. I do feel like it's a desperate coaching staff this week, which maybe it shouldn't give me a good feeling, but I do have a good feeling because these guys know, like, what they've done at 4-4 is just not even close to being good enough, and it's a winnable game on the road against Washington. I think they rise to the occasion.
Yeah, if they lose, it's practically an offer on the road this year because you can't even really count a road win at UCLA if USC were to get one at the end of the year. That's not really a road game, and you can't go an entire year at a school like USC and not win a road game. That would be unbelievable.
Unheard of. I mean,
it's been
beat LSU. Remember that, everyone? Like, what the heck happened?
It's been a calendar year since a real road win. So,
well, we'll see. Calendar day today, Halloween. Thank you guys so much for joining us here on Tunnel Vision. If you're still sticking around in the chat, can I get a flex from you, Ryan? A full flex? And that's a great photo right there. But thank you guys so much for joining us in the chat. If you're still around, please make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and we hope to see you out at Sluggers. Ryan, what time is it tomorrow?
Sluggers, 6 p.m.
6
Friday
p.m.
night, downtown Seattle.
Downtown Seattle. So you guys can hang out with us, talk about the game. I don't know what you guys are doing with your hands, but thank you guys so much for watching.
For the meetup.
We will see you guys on Sunday for a recap show. Enjoy the rest of your Halloween.